They said the dog was born blind. Every report said it. Every test backed it. Every voice that mattered had already moved on, except one, because the SEAL who worked with that dog, who trained him, deployed with him, trusted him, noticed something no one else did. The way the dog always turned his head, like he was trying to see without seeing. The way he froze before doorways, waited half a second longer in tunnels, flinched when light changed too fast. The system said, he's adapted. Let it go. But the SEAL couldn't. Not when it was his K9. Not when the bond ran deeper than paperwork. And it all came down to one moment. A simple test, a quiet medic, and a reaction that should have been impossible. Because what they discovered wasn't just a misdiagnosis. It was something no one was supposed to find. So before you see what the system missed, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and stay with us. Because this isn't just a story about a second chance. It's about the dog who saw everything. The moment someone finally believed he could. They called him Odin. Most didn't know why. Maybe because he never blinked when bullets flew. Maybe because he never barked unless it mattered. But his handler, Petty Officer First Class Mason Rourke, knew the real reason. Odin never looked anyone in the eye. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't fear. It was absence. Like the world in front of him didn't quite register the way it should. Like he was operating off instinct and command, not sight. Not really. But Odin was sharp. Too sharp. During ops, he moved with purpose. Sniffed explosives no one else caught, brought down a hostile once with nothing but a change in wind direction and a low growl Rourke had learned to trust more than any radio signal. And yet, even in the kennel, when other dogs watched for their handlers, Odin didn't lift his head. He'd sit, still, waiting. Much like he was listening for something only he understood. Rourke had picked up on it the first week they were paired. The head tilt was constant. Angled just enough to suggest he was adjusting, triangulating from sound. At night, Odin would hesitate on stairwells, slow in low light, and when Rourke tossed a ball during off hours, Odin never chased it. Not until it bounced, not until it made sound. He asked the vet once, casual-like, is it possible he's got some vision issue? The lieutenant barely glanced up from the chart. Odin, born blind, congenital, happens sometimes in Malinois, but he compensates. You'll never notice it operationally. Right, Rourke had said. Compensates. And that was that. Odin was cleared for every mission, passed every tactical test, qualified with flying colors. So Rourke learned to stop asking. Because when you're in a unit like theirs, results spoke louder than theory. And Odin delivered every time. They moved through green zones in silent sync. Rourke would barely need to speak. Just a hand signal. Just a shift of posture. Odin would sweep ahead, nose down, every muscle coiled but calm, no leash ever needed. When other handlers bragged about how aggressive their dogs were, Rourke stayed quiet. Because Odin didn't posture, he didn't growl unless there was something real to growl about. And when he did, men listened. But even in those moments, Rourke couldn't shake it. The way Odin's ears twitched more than his eyes, the way his body reacted half a second before the world caught up. It was like he lived in a different bandwidth. And maybe that's why Rourke bonded with him the way he did. Not out of pity, out of admiration. Odin wasn't broken. He just adapted. And in a place like theirs, where things got messy fast, that kind of adaptation looked a lot like strength. Still, there were moments, small ones, moments when Rourke would crouch down after a training drill, whisper something low, and Odin would turn, not to him, but to the wall behind him, listening, not looking. The eye contact never came, and Rourke accepted it. Because some dogs bark, some dogs bite, and some, like Odin, moved through the world like ghosts, efficient, silent, and unquestioned. Until one day, someone finally asked the question, not Rourke, not command, but someone no one saw coming. And what they found, it changed everything. No one in Rourke's unit questioned Odin's place because in their world, green was the only color that mattered, green on readiness. Green on response, green on performance logs. Odin had all of it. When their SEAL team cycled through combat readiness evaluations, the dogs went through their own. Explosive detection, obedience under fire, silent breach entry. Odin passed each drill like it was muscle memory. The base veterinary officers had files thicker than a mission op plan. They'd done the exams, ran the scans, consulted notes from Odin's early months in training. The conclusion? Clear, final, repeated. Congenital blindness, non-progressive, no surgical path. A box got checked. A few lines went into the system. Compensates exceptionally. No visual distress under combat conditions. Retain operational status. And that was that. The trainers, they didn't mind. Jill, Odin wasn't the kind of dog you bragged about at the range, but he wasn't the one biting through fences either. He just worked. And for the SEALs, that meant he earned his slot. Still, Rourke had asked once. Just once. They were in Bahrain, staging for a quiet Overwatch op. Odin had hesitated near a glass corridor lined with light strips. Nothing dramatic, just one paw frozen midair before he stepped forward. Later that night, Rourke cornered the unit's vet tech over boxed chow. You ever think it's worth another look? Odin's eyes, I mean. The tech had blinked like Rourke had asked something taboo. It's been checked, he said. By who? Everyone. Initial eval in Belgium, medical in Pensacola, reconfirmed at Pendleton, then again here. If you want to see the reports, I can print them, but unless he starts walking into walls, it's not our concern. Rourke didn't press, because he knew the rules. Never slow the machine, and Odin didn't slow it. He cleared rooms without hesitation. He alerted 3 seconds before a hostile raised a weapon. In the dark, he tracked scent through wind and sweat and sand. Whatever blind meant in his case, it didn't mean broken. So Rourke filed the thought away, like an itch you learn to ignore. But because SEALs weren't taught to dwell, they were taught to operate, execute, move forward. And dogs like Odin, they were considered part of the gear, highly trained, highly respected, but gear nonetheless. You didn't question a suppressed rifle just because the trigger felt stiff. You didn't question a radio just because the static clicked twice. So you didn't question Odin, not if his results were clean. The system had vetted him. The file said blind. The handlers before Rourke had signed off. The mission boards kept assigning him. And the unit, from the CO down to the guy scrubbing the mudroom, followed the same protocol. Don't fix what ain't failed. But Rourke wasn't built that way. Not entirely. Something about Odin didn't sit right. Not because he couldn't see, but because everyone had accepted it without actually seeing him. And that distinction? That's where the cracks begin. Not with defiance, but with doubt. And in a unit that runs like a machine, even the smallest crack has a sound. It just takes the right ear to hear it. It happened on a Tuesday, a controlled training op, low stakes on paper, just a mock urban extraction at the edge of the base. One of those standard drills with pop-up targets, blank rounds, and evaluators tucked into second-story windows with clipboards and coffee. Odin had done these a dozen times. He ran like he knew the blueprint. The team breached from the west side, Rourke behind the second man, Odin out front by 6 meters. His harness was off. This was a free sweep drill. The dog had space to work, space to think. They were 3 buildings in when it happened. A decoy target moved, quick, sharp. As a flash of body across the hall. The cue was visual. Every other dog in the rotation that morning had reacted to it instantly. But Odin didn't. He paused, just for a second, long enough that the evaluators noticed. Rourke noticed, too. He felt it. The shift in weight, the change in cadence. Then Odin turned and moved. But not toward the visual, toward the sound the target made half a second later, the scuff of a boot on tile. He still completed the task, took the decoy down with precision, clean hold, no break. But Rourke knew that half second was wrong. After the drill, they ran debrief in the motor pool hangar. Rourke stayed silent as the others broke down angles, timing entry strategy. Odin sat at his feet, calm as ever, ears turning slightly at every voice. Then Lieutenant Delaney, the evaluator, called him aside. "Oh, dog's solid," and he said. But you notice he hesitated. Rourke didn't fake ignorance. "Yeah, I saw it. Unusual? A little." Delaney shrugged. "Maybe the light hit weird. Target moved fast, could be anything. Still green across the board." Still green. That phrase again. Later that night, Rourke couldn't let it go. He sat in the kennel, leaning against the chain link while Odin paced in that slow, alert circle he did before he slept. The light overhead flickered once. Odin flinched. Rourke blinked. "You saw that?" he muttered. Odin didn't respond, obviously, but he stopped pacing. Saturday. Turned toward the far corner, not toward Rourke, toward the hum of the light ballast. And in that moment, Rourke felt something tighten in his chest. Because a blind dog wouldn't flinch from a flicker. Wouldn't follow the sound of a boot instead of the movement of a body. Wouldn't hesitate, just enough to leave a question behind. So he raised it. Officially this time. Tapped the vet staff in the morning, spoke with Lieutenant Halverson, the dog program liaison. "I think something's off," he said. "I don't know what exactly." But the dog's reacting like he sees, or tries to, and if there's even a 1% chance he's not blind, we should confirm. Halverson gave him that tight military smile. "We have confirmed. 4 times." Rourke waited. Halverson added, "Handler notes aren't diagnostics, Rourke. I appreciate the vigilance, I do, but Odin's evaluations are rock solid. You're projecting." Rourke stayed quiet, because they always said that when someone asked too many questions. Projecting, seeing what you want to see. And maybe that was true. Maybe he just wanted to believe his dog wasn't living in darkness. But something deeper twisted in his gut. Not pride, not fantasy, doubt, not about Odin, about the system. The report said blind. The dog said otherwise. And eventually, one of those 2 stories was going to crack. Corpsman Avery Maddox wasn't supposed to be there long. 2-week rotation, fill-in duty, run medical checks, update files, keep his head down. He wasn't a specialist, not an officer, just a Navy medic with decent instincts and a habit of paying attention to things that didn't bark unless they meant it. He noticed Odin on day 3, the way the dog moved, calm, precise, but odd, like the timing was just a breath off, like he was calculating everything from vibration and noise, not light and motion. He watched the dog track a moving target across a training pen. Odin didn't follow the movement, he followed the sound, exactly half a second behind. Maddox didn't say anything at first. Most people didn't like when you talk too much on a rotation you weren't invited to. But on day 5, he ran Odin's physical, routine vitals, mobility check, eye reflex, and standard across the board. Except when Maddox shined his penlight, Odin's pupils responded. Sluggish, sure, but they constricted. Maddox frowned. He did it again, right eye, then left. Same thing. Response. Now that wasn't supposed to happen. He checked the file. Bilateral congenital blindness, no response to light stimulus, evaluation confirmed by Naval Veterinary Command. Then what the hell was this? He didn't jump to conclusions. Maybe the dog was reacting to something else. Shadow heat, ambient light shifts. Still, he made a note. Later that afternoon, he caught Rourke in the motor pool, sitting with Odin like usual, half-shaded corner, dog sprawled at his boots, both of them looking like they'd been born in the same deployment bag. "Mind if I ask something weird?" Maddox said, casual. Rourke glanced up. "Shoot. Your dog. Does he ever look at you?" The question wasn't hostile, just plain. Rourke didn't answer for a second. Then he shook his head. "No, never has. Not once." Maddox nodded slowly. "Thought so." He crouched near Odin, careful not to startle. The dog turned his head toward the sound, but didn't look him in the eye. "File says he's blind," Maddox said softly. "He is," Rourke replied. "Or he was told to be." Rourke raised an eyebrow. Maddox stood. "You ever heard of corneal haze, subretinal occlusion, things that can look like blindness but aren't?" I saw something in his eyes, something that doesn't match the file." Rourke crossed his arms. "He's been through 4 full evals. You think they missed something? I think everyone trusted the first diagnosis so much. No one ever checked again." He wasn't accusing. He was curious, careful, but Rourke's expression had changed, because something about that hit too close to a suspicion he hadn't put words to yet. Maddox didn't push it. He just said one more thing. "If he's blind, then I'm wrong. Simple as that, but if he isn't, and we've been operating on a bad assumption, someone should probably look." Then he walked off, didn't drop his rank, didn't ask for permission, just left the question hanging. And for the first time since they'd been partnered, Rourke looked down at Odin, really looked, and wondered how much of the world his dog might have been seeing through silence. The next morning, Maddox put in a quiet request through the standard channel. Nothing dramatic, just a line item on the internal chart. Recommend follow-up ophthalmic screening for K9 Odin, potential irregular pupillary response observed during physical, HM2A Maddox. It took 3 hours for the chain of command to respond. The reply came back crisp. Request acknowledged. No action required. Medical file closed. Maddox wasn't surprised, but Rourke was. He read the response twice, then walked straight into the CO's outer office, Odin heeling beside him. Lieutenant Commander Baines, team lead, sat behind his desk with mission folders stacked like sandbags on both sides. He looked up without smiling. You need something. Rourke? Permission to request independent re-eval for Odin. The pause was sharp. You serious? Yes, sir. Baines leaned back. Based on what? Rourke hesitated. Instinct, he said, and something the corpsman noticed. Baines raised a brow. The corpsman? Yes, sir. Baines glanced at the wall, exhaled. That dog's been evaluated more times than I've had leave. Belgium, Pensacola, Pendleton, last 2 cycles right here. 4 different veterinarians, all saying the same thing. I know. Then what exactly are you trying to find? I don't know, Rourke admitted, but maybe that's the point. The CO's expression hardened slightly. Look, I respect you. You and Odin have been clean, consistent performers, but poking holes in his file because a medic saw something off in his eyes, that's shaky ground. People start wondering if your head's in the game. Rourke stiffened. Baines didn't flinch. Let it go, he said flatly. Dog's green, mission's Thursday. Don't waste time chasing ghosts. Rourke nodded once. Understood, sir. But he didn't let it go, because that night he found Maddox in the far end of the medical bay, reorganizing IV packs, face tight with quiet frustration. They shut it down, Maddox said without looking up. Rourke nodded. Yeah. They said I overstepped, that I'm not a specialist, not a vet, that the file's been signed off multiple times. He dropped a pack into the drawer a little too hard. Basically told me, stay in your lane. Rourke leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You gonna listen? Maddox looked at him for the first time in hours. No. Rourke cracked the barest smile. Good. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Maddox added, there's one test they never logged. Ever. Something you could do right now. Not invasive, won't trigger a review. Rourke tilted his head. What kind of test? Maddox reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handheld penlight. Just watch the eyes, he said. In the dark. Close. No noise. See what he does. Rourke looked down at Odin. Calm, alert, steady as always. If he was wrong, this meant nothing. But if he was right, it was the beginning of something they couldn't ignore. They waited until the compound was quiet. Late. No drills. No eyes. Rourke brought Odin to the unlit edge of the training yard, where floodlights didn't reach and the sand muffled every step. Maddox stood nearby, barely speaking. No commands, he said softly. Just let him stand. Let him settle. Odin did. Still as always, no leash, no tether, just presence. Rourke crouched, penlight in hand. Not a fancy tool, not a military-grade optic, just something pulled from the corner of a medic's drawer. Something you'd use to check for concussions in the field. He clicked it on, the beam cut through the dark, sharp and sudden, and Odin flinched. Not dramatically, just a sharp recoil of the head, a turn. His ears flattened, then he adjusted, his body aligned with the light's direction, his pupils constricted. Maddox watched from 3 feet away. You see that? He asked. Rourke didn't answer, he just did it again, this time slower. Moved the beam in a soft arc from right to left. Odin tracked it, not with his nose, with his eyes. Eyes that, according to 4 separate evaluations, weren't supposed to register light at all. The dog wasn't responding to sound. There was none. He wasn't reacting to body language or training cues. He was watching. The penlight clicked off. Silence. Odin sat and turned his head toward Rourke. For the first time in 3 years of deployments, briefings, field checks, and drills, he looked directly at his handler, not with perfect clarity, not laser-focused, but aligned. Rourke felt something cold crawl across the back of his neck, because this wasn't a miracle. This wasn't some divine recovery. This was something else. This was a mistake buried under paperwork, a mistake sealed by confidence and repetition, a mistake that had lasted years. Maddox exhaled quietly. They never did the surface scan, did they? Rourke shook his head. I don't think anyone looked past the chart. No one had questioned it, because when an official record said born blind, that was the end of the story. You don't second-guess established truth in a system that runs on checklists, but the checklist had failed. The system had missed something simple, and now they knew. Rourke stood, pocketing the penlight. Odin remained still, gaze half lifted toward the shadows where the light had vanished. We say something? Maddox asked, voice low. Yeah, Rourke said. We say something. He didn't sound excited, didn't sound vindicated. He sounded like a man who realized the truth carried weight, because the moment they said it out loud, everything changed. Files, evaluations, command trust, careers, and maybe that's why no one else had looked, because sometimes silence is safer than starting over. By 0800 hours, the request was on the desk of the base's veterinary commanding officer, Major Sinclair. It wasn't a formal complaint, it was a memo. Short, clipped, and written in the precise, flat tone of a man used to walking tightropes. Observation of unexpected ocular reactivity in canine Odin. Request comprehensive reevaluation under alternate conditions. Recommend reevaluation by an ophthalmic specialist not previously assigned to Odin's case. P.O.1M Rourke, HM2A. Maddox. They submitted it together. They didn't expect applause, but they didn't expect what came next either. That afternoon, Rourke was pulled from rotation. Maddox received notice of immediate reassignment. It wasn't disciplinary, not technically, but it wasn't subtle. They were being shuffled off the board, neutralized. Rourke didn't argue. He went straight to Lieutenant Commander Baines again, knocking once before entering. Baines looked up, jaw tight. I saw the memo, he said, and I saw the response. You know how this looks. Or Rourke, like I care about my dog? Like you're second-guessing every specialist who signed off on him for 3 years. I'm not second-guessing, Rourke said calmly. I'm first seeing. No one's checked this angle before. You don't know that? Then prove me wrong. Baines stood, hands on hips. You understand the implication, right? If this gets traction, if Odin was misdiagnosed, we've been running a K9 in combat environments under a false medical premise. That's liability. That's chain of command embarrassment. That's a goddamn problem. Rourke didn't blink. And if we ignore it, it's worse. There was a long pause. Baines exhaled sharply and shook his head. You're forcing my hand, Rourke. No, sir, Rourke said. The truth is... 2 hours later, the three of them sat in a room without windows. Rourke, Maddox, Major Sinclair. Sinclair didn't hide his irritation. You boys know what you're suggesting? Yes, sir, Rourke said. You're saying 3 veterinary officers, 2 external consultants, and 4 years of documentation are wrong, and a field corpsman with a flashlight figured it out? No one's accusing anyone of malice, Maddox said, measured. We're asking for one more look. I've looked, Sinclair said coldly. I did the last evaluation myself. Respectfully, sir, Rourke said. You did it assuming blindness. We're asking you to look without that assumption. Sinclair's gaze sharpened. This isn't a game. If we reopen this and find nothing, we've wasted time, questioned experts, and undermined protocol. And if we do find something, do you have any idea what kind of storm that kicks up? Maddox leaned forward. Then maybe the storm is overdue. It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. Sinclair stared at him, at Rourke, then at the silent dog sitting between them, watching with that same tilted head and unreadable stillness. Fine, Sinclair said at last. One evaluation. External specialist. I'll authorize it. But after that, this ends. Rourke nodded, because that was all they needed. One clean look, one fresh set of eyes. And if they were wrong, Odin's file would stay closed forever. But if they were right, then everything they'd built their silence around was about to be rewritten. The appointment was scheduled 2 days later. Dr. Miss Amelia Groves was flown in from Naval Medical Center San Diego, one of the few active-duty ophthalmic specialists certified to consult on military working animals. She didn't waste time, didn't ask for background, just requested the chart, the dog, and a room with low lighting. She greeted no one but the dog. Hello, Odin, she said, crouching with practiced grace. Let's take a look. He didn't flinch, just sat, still attentive. The base vet team watched from behind the glass. Major Sinclair stood with arms folded, unreadable. Rourke leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. Maddox stood beside him, silent. Dr. Groves began the exam with a direct ophthalmoscope, a basic, unassuming tool, light into the right eye, pause, light into the left. Another pause. Her brow furrowed. She adjusted the angle, shifted the intensity. Mutt changed tools. Now she was using a slit lamp, scanning slowly, methodically. She didn't speak. Then, almost an hour in, she asked one question. Has he ever been diagnosed with lenticular opacity? The room behind the glass went still. Major Sinclair keyed the intercom. His file states congenital bilateral optic nerve hypoplasia. Groves didn't look up. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. What do you mean? She straightened. There's no evidence of optic nerve atrophy. His pupils are reactive. The fundus is clear, but... She paused, tapping the edge of her scope. There is a thin, irregular membrane over both retinas. It's fibrous, translucent, and removable. Sinclair's jaw tightened. You're saying he's not blind? I'm saying he was misdiagnosed, Groves said. Severely. She turned toward the glass, toward the men watching. Your dog was never blind, she said, like he's been seeing through fog his entire life. And if someone had looked for this 15 minutes longer, they would have seen it too. The silence that followed felt heavier than most battlefield debriefs. Maddox let out a breath like he'd been holding it for days. Rourke stepped forward, not triumphantly, but like a man finally reaching a conclusion he never wanted to be right about. Sinclair didn't move. Dr. Groves turned back to Odin and ran her hand gently over his head. We can fix this, she said softly, cleanly. No implants, no major risk. Just a peel and recovery. He'll see clearly for the first time. No one said anything. Because what do you say to that? 4 years of silence, of trusting the file, of never asking the question. And all it took was a new set of eyes, and the courage to ask again. They didn't use the main surgical suite. This wasn't a major operation, not by military standards. It was delicate, sure, but not dramatic. There were no ventilators humming or rows of blinking monitors, just a quiet room inside the veterinary annex, one of the smaller ones, the kind used for orthopedic work or routine procedures. Dr. Groves arrived an hour before sunrise. Her demeanor hadn't changed, calm, professional, precise. The dog was already prepped, shaved, sedated, and monitored under light anesthesia. The table was steel. The tools were simple: microforceps, irrigation syringe, an ophthalmic viscoelastic solution. No crowd gathered, no cameras, just the medic, Rourke, quietly seated outside the glass. Maddox remained in the hallway, pacing in deliberate loops. A technician tapped notes onto a clipboard. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and static. Inside the room, Groves worked without narration. She didn't ask for help, didn't explain her process. First, the right eye. She made a tiny incision, submillimetric, just near the cornea's edge. Then, with the kind of confidence that only comes from years in the field, she began peeling back the membrane. It wasn't thick, just stubborn, a fibrous veil, a leftover thread from fetal development that, in most dogs, would have dissolved before birth. But in Odin, it had lingered, hardened, blurred everything behind it like frosted glass. 10 minutes later, the membrane was floating in a saline tray. She moved to the left eye. Same incision, same patience, same outcome. By the time she stepped back and removed her gloves, it had been less than 40 minutes total. No complications, no bleeding, no need for stitches. You'll want to give it a day, she told the staff. Let him come out of sedation naturally. Eyes will be sensitive, but you'll know soon. Rourke didn't say much, just nodded once, and waited. The day crawled. Maddox sat beside the crate, speaking softly now and then. Odin stirred mid-afternoon, but didn't rise. His breathing was slow, steady. Staff came and went, but the medic never left. Evening came, then dusk. By the time the first eye opened, groggy, confused, Rourke had already set down his clipboard and was sitting on the floor. Odin blinked once, then again. The lights were dimmed to protect sensitivity, but even in that soft amber glow, something shifted. The dog tracked motion, followed Rourke's hand, and for the first time in 4 years, adjusted focus. Rourke didn't move, didn't speak, he just waited. Because the next moment, if it came, would speak louder than any reporter medal. He didn't rush it. That was the first thing Maddox noticed when Odin stirred again in the early morning hours. No wild reaction. No jerky movements. No panic. Just a slow, careful rise, head lifting off his front paws, as if he were trying to remember the shape of the world. The room was dim but not dark. A lamp glowed softly near the corner. The blinds were cracked open just enough for a thread of pale dawn to stretch across the floor. Maddox didn't speak. He was already on the ground, back against the far wall, legs pulled in loosely. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. But he hadn't left. Not since yesterday. Odin blinked. Once. Twice. Then tilted his head. But not in that familiar off-center angle they'd seen for years. Not the tilt of a dog guessing at shadows or calculating his steps from instinct alone. This time, it was alignment. Both ears forward, both eyes locked. Maddox didn't move. He didn't dare. Odin's head turned slightly, tracking the arc of a dust mote floating lazily in the morning light. He followed it, not by sound, not by scent, by sight. Then, slowly, with hesitant paws pressing against the mat, Odin stood. He didn't stumble, didn't sway. He walked 2 quiet steps forward and stopped. And then, just like that, his eyes found Maddox. Direct, clear, centered, no hesitation, no searching. The handler couldn't hold it in. He dropped his gaze, clenched his jaw, and bit back whatever sound had nearly escaped his throat. It wasn't joy. It wasn't shock. It was the feeling of something rearranging. A puzzle piece falling into place after you've stopped looking for where it went. Odin stepped forward again. One paw, then the next, stopped a foot away. And for the first time in their entire service together, the dog sat squarely in front of him. Not angled, not leaning, not listening for cues, just seeing him, really seeing. Maddox didn't say anything. He didn't reach out, didn't command or praise. He just looked back. 2 sets of eyes, finally aligned, 4 years too late. In that sterile room, with nothing but a low hum from the ventilation system and the faint sound of wind against the window panes, the world got quiet. Not because nothing was happening, but because finally, everything was. The new file landed on Maddox's desk a week later. Different color tab, different classification, same dog. He opened it. One look at the top page told him everything had changed. The diagnosis was gone, replaced, corrected, not overwritten, that wouldn't be protocol, but formally updated with a new header. Correctable developmental obstruction, not congenital blindness. No apology, just clinical accuracy. And that, in a place like this, meant everything. Odin was listed as fully operational. Again, but this time, without the quiet caveat that used to trail behind every sentence. There was no asterisk beside his capabilities, no implied deficit masked by praise. The system hadn't shouted its error, it had simply corrected it, which, in Maddox's world, was rarer than most people would think. There was no medal for the medic, no press release. But when the next handler training session came through, Maddox noticed something different in the curriculum, a line in the medical assessment checklist that hadn't been there before. It was small, almost invisible, but it was the same test the medic had done that day in the field tent, the one that had startled Odin, the one that had started everything. Somebody had seen value in it, somebody had written it in, and that was how systems quietly evolve. The medic didn't mention it, didn't take credit. He just kept showing up, quieter than before, if that was even possible, and resumed routine rounds like it hadn't cost him anything to speak up. But Maddox knew better. He caught the look once, across the room during Odin's final post-op exam, when the dog, fully awake and fully focused, tracked the medic's movement with calm eyes and then lowered his head in a still, deliberate gesture. Not a flinch, a recognition, and the medic, ever understated, gave the barest nod. That was all. No speeches, no moments, no cinematic music, just acknowledgement between 2 souls who had both, in their own way, seen what others hadn't. As for Odin, his demeanor didn't radically change. He was still disciplined, still responsive, still mission-focused, but something had clarified. He was faster now, not in speed, but in precision. Less hesitation, sharper reactions in complex terrain, more confident turns in low light, and most of all, the way he scanned the world had changed. No more over-reliance on Maddox's voice, no more head tilts in uncertain angles. He moved like he trusted what he saw. Because now, finally, he could. And while nobody said it, everyone noticed. In briefings, on patrol, in after-action reports, the dog was sharper, the team was tighter. And Maddox? He learned something even more valuable than trust in the system. He learned the weight and the cost of trusting your gut when the system says it's already been checked, because sometimes it hasn't. There was no ceremony, no speech, no new badge pinned to Odin's harness. Just a quiet morning, somewhere far from command posts and clinics, when the team prepped for a standard recon op, the kind that wouldn't make headlines, but would matter deeply to someone, somewhere. Odin sat beside the vehicle, waiting for Maddox's signal. The air was still, not tense, not heavy, just still, the way it gets before movement. Maddox finished his check, slung his pack over one shoulder, and gave the faintest click of his tongue. Odin didn't need more. He stood, moved, paused only once, not out of hesitation, but out of something closer to curiosity. He turned his head toward the far end of the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon line with deliberate attention. Then, slowly, precisely, he tracked a flock of birds lifting into the air, watching them climb, separate, settle again. He didn't bark, didn't bolt. He just saw, fully. And Maddox, standing a few paces behind watching that gaze hold, felt something tighten in his throat. Not pride, not relief, just presence. The clarity of knowing this dog, his dog, was finally moving through the world on his own terms, and that from this point forward, no one could ever tell him again what was or wasn't possible. Not with paperwork, not with protocol, not with certainty, pretending to be truth. The truck door slammed shut behind them, gear shifted, boots scraped gravel, and somewhere ahead, the next mission waited. But Odin didn't need a target yet. He just kept looking, not for instruction, not for praise, just forward. Eyes open, wide, alive, and that, Maddox thought, was all he ever wanted to give him. If you were the handler, would you have trusted the system, or would you have trusted the dog? And tell me honestly, do you think experience can sometimes blind people more than inexperience? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We actually read them. If you made it this far, hit that like button. It helps more than you think. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon so you never miss a story like this. Share this video if you think someone else needs to see it. And while you're here, more stories are on screen now. Watch them next, and I'll see you tomorrow. Same time.